Welcome back to the Mega Rising card comparison videos. Today we're going over Psychic and Fighting. Natu has a 60 HP card for 10 damage, or 50 HP and 20 damage. The lower HP allows you to pull the old one with Lycia, which might be nice, but it makes you much more vulnerable leading with it and the like, so it really depends on your deck construction and what you're trying to do. Our new Xatu is a 3 energy generic attacker competing with the likes of Grumpig of all things. It's not really worth even looking into. The old one is very interesting, as it can reduce targets to 10 HP, which can do as much as 200 damage to some Mega Pokemon roaming around now. With Will, alongside Burn or Poison, this is actually just an auto kill, and I've seen some wacky Grafaiai or Typhlosion decks seeking to do just that. But the problem is the decks are pretty garbage, unless the opponent allows you to fully set up and sends out their most vulnerable things against you. Maybe with the right allies, the original Xatu could be good, but there's no such hope for the new one. The new Misdreavus works like Sneasel did, averaging 20 damage across 2 flips. To me, the best of the 4 by far is the Will-O-Wisp version. Not only does it have a useful ability, but it also has less HP, which allows you to pull it with Lycia on turn 1 or the like. Fantina benefits more from fielding your Drifblim and Mismagius as fast as possible, so having a draw effect for the basics is really good. When I first saw the original Mismagius, I was taken aback at how strong it seemed. I pictured something like Future Sight in the video games. However, the attack is nowhere close as good as it reads. Merely switching out or even evolving will cancel the attack entirely. There is stall value in forcing switches, but I think there's just way too much counterplay to make the card viable. The new one, curiously, is actually pretty good. The HP is really low, but playing down Misdreavus on turn 1 and evolving on turn 3, you can actually use Fantina to get 2 energies at once. Even in the later game, Fantina subsidizing the attack cost makes this card decently strong for very little investment, and while I don't think it's amazing, it could be used as a support card for some other Psychic deck. Our newest Sableye is one of the most interesting cards I've seen. You do 70 damage on 2 energies, but you're forced to discard something in order to attack. The damage is alright for the energy, and you don't need to evolve it or anything to get it going. If you're just using it as a regular attacker, it's honestly not bad, but I think you'll burn through your deck way too quickly. But I've been seeing this as a slot in on Mega Altaria decks as an answer to Oricorio. It takes up next to no deck space, and doesn't require almost any investment compared to other Oricorio counters like Gliscor or Giratina, making it much more attractive. The new Duskull deals either 10 or 40 damage on a coin flip, which is technically a higher average than the original's 20. It has less HP, which as usual makes it more vulnerable to being killed, but also allows you to draw it with Lycia. There's a deck that's been making the rounds using only a single Dusknoir, so using Lycia to reliably get your one Duskull alongside a Swablu or something might actually be viable. The new Dusclops is a mile better than the old one. Not only does the new one attack more reliably, but the old one requiring 3 energies is actually more than one of the Dusknoirs, and thus a waste of investment. However, one Dusknoir is used almost exclusively for its ability, while the other can attack relatively cheaply, so you could just as easily use a rare candy and skip this stage. Here's Dusknoir, and I've got a lot to say about these two. The original Dusknoir had one of the best abilities in the game, allowing you to fully heal any other Pokemon at the expense of Dusknoir taking the damage. This is insanely useful for a ton of reasons. For example, Dusknoir is compatible with Lily, which functionally means you can use Lily to heal any of your Pokemon. Additionally, even if the damage would kill Dusknoir, it still fully heals the target, which means you can get your Caped Giratina from 10 HP back to full. And while this will kill the Dusknoir, it's only worth 1 knockout point, and healing a Mon worth 2. I've often thought this Pokemon would be strong if it only had the right ally, and now with Mega Altaria's gargantuan HP total and the lost condition of dying, Dusknoir is the perfect card to support it. The new Dusknoir is unfortunately not nearly as impressive in my eyes, though it's still an interesting card. For its energy, it's pretty strong, and it has the really interesting ability to deny the opponent a knockout point on a coin flip. Unfortunately, this coin flip will almost always happen on the opponent's turn, and thus it's not compatible with Will. The obvious problem with this card is that you're devoting several energies and a huge amount of deck space to it, so even if the opponent doesn't get a knockout point, it's still an enormous setback when it dies. I can see this card on a deck with Giratina EX perhaps, which is only a basic and doesn't mind the deck space that Dusknoir will use. Not to mention, it can charge its own energies, and thus can afford to divert some to Dusknoir. Dusknoir can additionally one-tap Oricorio, for example, and its damage is not bad on other targets, while it has healing with Lily. Unfortunately, I think this card will add a tremendous component of randomness to the game. The opponent has an equal chance of needing to kill a Dusknoir and a Giratina to win, or a Dusknoir and 2 Giratinas to win, and the latter is obviously a much more difficult task. This card seems like it could do some work, but it's very scary to run. Anyway, here's Drifloon. The new one hits the bench for 20, but can't attack the active Pokemon. I think this is usually better than the middle one, but I actually quite like the original now since it has 50 HP and can be drawn with Lycia, which as I said benefits Fantina decks. Our new Drifblim is very similar to the original one, dealing 60 damage on 2 energies, but unlike that card, you actually have a component of ramping damage with additional energy. This has obvious synergy with Fantina, which can be used to put energy on it for free, but every other form of energy acceleration, from Gardevoir to Lunala and Giratina to Ho-Oh, just makes your deck way too clumsy. I've used this card quite a bit, and in my experience it's really hard to ever do more than about 100 damage with it. Unfortunately, its HP HP is just a bit too low. That being said, it's still comfortably the best of the Drifblims in my opinion. The new Swirlix deals little damage, but takes reduced damage on its next turn, which is useful for surviving. But I'd use the Sweets Relay one even on not Sweets Relay decks. I consider the Sweets Relay Slurpuff to be an incredible card. 90 damage on 2 energies every turn on a mom with pretty good HP is really no joke. The new one deals a little more damage than the Sweets Relay one on its first attack, but the Sweets Relay Slurpuff has already pulled ahead by 2 attacks, and it's only getting worse after that. The new card does have a healing effect, which is pretty nice, and I guess you could use it alongside Indeedee or something, but you could just as easily use Indeedee to support the middle one, so whatever. Our new card bank is a Psychic card, and isn't competing with its original card for deck slots. It's only 50 HP, and thus it draws with Lycia, which is really good in Altaria decks. I've been running this card, and the cheapness of its attack combined with its relatively good damage and excellent damage mitigation have made it perform much better than I thought. It's quite strong in the early game when you're still trying to get Altaria set up, thanks to its minimal energy investment and stalling with guard press. Klefki is technically competing with the original card since you can run both in metal decks, but the new one can be used in any deck. It's 50 HP, thus draws with Lycia, and it can be used to remove tools from the opponent's Pokemon. It's kind of better and worse than Guzma. On the plus side, it doesn't use up your supporter for the turn, thus you can still play a Cyrus or a Red, which is invaluable. But it only removes tools from the active slot, whereas Guzma removes all tools. Additionally, it is a basic, which means if you run a deck without many basics, you'll occasionally be forced to lead with it, which can be very detrimental. I consider this to be a very good card in the right decks, maybe alongside Altaria, where you'll rarely be forced to lead with it, plus it fills up your bench to power Altaria up. Sandshrew got a box standard evolving basic this set. It's probably exactly as good as the original Sandshrew, which has more HP and less damage. Your Sand Slashes are either 50 on 1 energy or 70 on 2, and they're probably about equally viable overall. I'm actually a pretty big fan of the 50 on 1 stage 1 cards like this, and Fighting is a good type, but it's almost identical to Island's Primeape, and it's not like anyone ever ran that. It's hard to imagine using either of these when Donphan EX exists. The new Pseudo-Widow is stronger if it's had damage marked on it, going from 30 to 80. This makes it a relatively good stall card in the early game, though obviously it's going to be useless in the late game when things can just one-touch it. The high retreat cost is quite annoying on a basic too. The Fire-type P-Train is very similar to this, but that one has more HP, is stronger when it's not hurt, and retreats for free, making Pseudo-Widow look a lot worse in comparison. I do appreciate that it's hiding in a Swarm of Trevenant, which is actually how you catch it in Gen 6. Our new Makuhita has an absolutely titanic retreat cost, energy cost, and relatively low HP, making it look like one of the worst cards in the new set, or maybe the game as a whole. Its high retreat seems intended to be used alongside Heavy Helmet or maybe to power up Golurk, but I'd much rather have the original, which works with Leaf and can actually attack things. The new Hariyama is insanely powerful with a very useful tool removal effect, but that attack cost is just way too high on a type with no energy ramp. It's compatible with Hala, which can be used to force it to survive an extra turn, which is on paper very powerful to allow it to attack repeatedly or at least get its energies on in time. But even still, I think that cost is just too high. Amusingly, Hala can also be used with the original Hariyama, which activates much more quickly and still has a pretty disruptive effect. But the damage output on that one isn't so high, especially when it's not going to be hitting the same mon repeatedly. I said in a previous video that Hippopotas was a candidate for the game's worst card, and this new one is very marginally better since it can attack with less investment. Both cards can be used with Heavy Helmet or alongside Golurk. The new Hippowdon is probably better than the last one, with a cheaper attack that's not much weaker. You can use Will to bypass the negative attack effect, and actually you can use Memory Light to access Hippopotas' attack instead, though if you're doing that, you probably really would use the original Hippopotas. Anyway, I wouldn't touch either of these, they look really bad. The latest Crocodile line is fighting type and thus not competing for deck slots. All of these cards look usable but unimpressive. I do really like the HP value of Crocodile itself, and that Rocket Grunt effect can be pretty obnoxious, but there's a lot of fighting cards you can get 3 energies on for a good effect. You might as well use Garchomp EX or Golem or something. Our new Golett is also a different type and thus not competing with the original. The new Golett card is extremely interesting and surprisingly seems really good to me. The HP is very high and it attacks very cheaply. Every time you attack, you draw 3 cards and deal 60 damage per card with 3 retreat cost or more, then you shuffle the cards back into the deck. I've seen an absolutely hysterical deck that's just 2 Golurk lines and then 14 high retreat cost stage 1s and stage 2s, alongside a couple draw cards like Copycat, just to ensure you get your Golurk more reliably. With this deck, you can reliably get either 120 or 180 damage every turn with Golurk, which is just absurd damage output, especially considering you can get it going as early as turn 4. Not to mention you can flex a bunch of really rare cards like Shiny Venusaur EX or whatever, since what cards you bring doesn't matter. You'll always start with Golett since it's your only basic, so the only real way to brick is not drawing your Golurk by turn 4 or 5, which is a very real possibility, but it's an absolutely terrifying rushdown deck if you get it. Our new Cabrawler is flat better than the original one on fighting decks. The original should still be used if evolving to the water type Crabominable, of course. We now have a fighting type Stuffle and Beware. Unfortunately, like the colorless ones, I think the energy cost is much too high to justify using them, though I will say the new Beware is much more consistent than the original two. Finally, we have a new Sandygast and Palosand. The latest Sandygast is a bit weaker than the middle one, but cancels the opponent's attack half the time, and that's pretty useful, so it's probably better. The new Palosand has a cheaper attack than the middle one, and that goes a long way to making it more viable. The new one is also compatible with Acerola, and weirdly, the synergy actually looks crazy good there, with you healing as much as 60 damage per turn while dealing as much as 110 per turn if you're wounded. Combined with your very high HP, and I think this might actually be a viable card, especially because Acerola's damage can knock things out, and thus can allow you to attack 2 different mons on the same turn. That's it for the Psychic and Fighting cards. Next video we'll pick up the remainder. Thanks for watching.